Welcome. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Daniel Davis, your host. For many of us, when we get into the rustle and the bustle and the fast-paced living in the city, going from job to home, and finding the routine just to be unbearable, sometimes we try to find ways that may be in our lives that we want to slow things down a bit. Once in a while, we pack up, maybe go away for a week or 2 weeks into the woods, into the mountains, by a lake, or maybe the ocean, just to take some time, some solace, just to kind of get our heads cleared and our focus straight again, so that way we can throw ourselves back into the fire of that tumultuous life we simply known as carving or etching out a living. Joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who did that, but actually did it on a grander scale. With 25 summers of back-to-the-earth adventure and a delightful, well-written book, our guest today joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today, along with his wife, decided, why don't we just build a log cabin and live there in the summer? Seems reasonable to me, getting back to the pioneer days, but sometimes adjusting from that kind of a lifestyle back to the city life and then back again can maybe be a little challenging. And besides, you just don't know what kind of things you're going to encounter. Ghost stories, murder mysteries, even the falling of spruce trees are all wrapped up into this and many, many other things. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is the author of a book simply titled Cabin Fever, Notes from a Part-Time Pioneer. And our guest today, William Sullivan, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. William, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
You bet. Now, that must have taken some real brass to go from being in college, and maybe moving in that direction to finally asking your wife, what do you think about building a log cabin and kind of living out in the woods? What kind of inspired you to think that way?
Well, you kind of have to set this in the perspective of the time, because we're talking 1977, and it was sort of the back to the earth movement, and the Whole Earth catalog was talking about, let's get back to nature and live like...
And the mountain man, simply known as Bill Walton, helped win the Trailblazers their 1977 championship.
Yeah, or live like Thoreau and Walden Pond. So the problem was that my parents actually had this remote property out in the Coast Range with no road to it. 50 acres on a half mile of river with no road and just trees. And so I suggested, why don't we go build a log cabin there? And we had no money, none at all. So we had to do it entirely by hand. We didn't even have a chainsaw. So we built it with we cut every tree with a two-man crosscut saw, the old-fashioned way, sawing each one down and then chopped all the notches by hand. It was quite an operation, especially for, as you say, two kids in college who'd never done anything like that before.
Well, that's usually the time to do it, too, is when you're kind of stretching out of the house and saying, I'm willing to take all my risks. Don't give me any opinions. How parents can be that way. Are you out of your mind? What were they like? Or how were they receiving that when you decided to move that direction?
Well, I remember my mother saying, how much damage can they do? And my dad rolling his eyes thinking,
It's like the swimming pool. Can I have a swimming pool? Yes, if you dig the hole, we know where that usually leads us.
Yeah, right. So again, with just no money, we just borrowed a car to haul a bunch of stuff to the nearest farm, which is a dairy farm across the river, and got an old boat for $25 and ferried it across the river, and then dragged it up to this site and put up a couple of tents and had enough beans and flour and stuff to feed us for a couple of months and just lived there in the woods and built this cabin. Yeah, so it really was a back-to-nature kind of experience, and the wild thing is that we still do this every summer. We still have this log cabin, and there still is no road, and we still go there every summer and live there out in the woods. And
I think what's really neat, too, is that I see the picture of your cabin on the front of the book, and it looks like it's really settled in, obviously, after more than 25 summers. It would be. But that what you put together, and as you were saying earlier in the program, with very little experience, especially maybe building experience, that it held together so well. So how did you learn to kind of piece this together? Did you actually create like a schematic and plans and all that, or did you just instinctively do things, ask questions? How was it that you went along the process?
Well, we did do a little bit of planning. there's an old, long tradition of building log cabins, especially in Oregon, where we live. And so we got some books, and we'd traveled in Europe and had I'd done drawings of the log cabins in Norway and the Swiss Alps, and seen how they did the little notches and put the floors in without using any nails. So we could kind of do that. All we really needed was some old windows, which we found when someone was replacing their old wooden windows, and then the tools. Even the roof we made by hand. Found an old cedar log and split it up into shakes using a froe and a glut, these old ancient tools to split shakes and then nail them onto the logs on the roof. So the cabin cost $200 to build, and at the time I thought that was a lot of money.
Yeah, but you look at the size of the cabin, and that's a bargain.
Well, it's a 4-bedroom house, but they're pretty small rooms, and we have a little spiral staircase that's made out of a log with steps notched into it, so you can get upstairs. But there isn't any plumbing. We really have to go down to the creek for water, and we have an outhouse. And so we boil the water on the wood stove. Of course, we had to carry the wood stove in. That was hard.
Now, I know what was funny as I was reading in the book is that when you went to the planning commission to get yourself a permit, and it's just, what's funny are the characters almost seem like they come out of a movie or television, like somebody actually wrote these people, but these were real people. But describe what that experience was like when you were trying to get your building permit.
Well, imagine, this is a kind of a small county in coastal Oregon, and you're going in there to ask for a building permit to build a log cabin, and they say, well, how many? What's the frontage to the road? And I say, well, there isn't a road. Well, how about the nearest road? Well, that would be maybe a mile away. And then, well, how many square feet are we talking about? And I say, well, it's only the original cabin. We started by building one room. Was 10 by 12 feet. And they couldn't imagine a house that was only 10 by 12 feet. And then they had started to wonder about how they're going to come in and do inspections, because you have to take a boat ride and then hike to get to this place. And they finally threw up their hands and said, why do you even come in here and ask about permits? This is the sort of thing people build in the woods without asking. But I don't know. My father was the editor of the newspaper in Salem, in the capital of Oregon, and I felt like, we had to do this, above board. So they gave us finally a permit, but a cow ate it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. You had to post this in a prominent spot, and one of the dairy cows that was on our side of the river came over and ate it a week later, so that was that. I figured that permit was digested, and sure, we were really part of the land.
One of the best permits the cows ever had.
Yeah, right.
Now, it wasn't always just you and your wife. That's how you started out, but eventually you began having children. And I believe it was Karen, your daughter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was funny when you were talking about her being within about, 8 to 10 months old and how she just had to be in the middle of everything. So here the isolation and the enjoyment of that seclusion, such as maybe Henry David Thoreau would enjoy, is now you have this baby, so to speak, and so that must have really kind of changed things a little bit, but in a great way as well, because here you're a family actually being together. Yeah.
Well, of course, kids don't think anything about, what their parents do. They assume that's normal. So here she is, this tiny baby, and we have to go up and build an addition to this cabin, because one room is not big enough if you've got a baby. So we need to add another room. That means cutting more trees. Well, so we take this baby up into the woods and set her down in the forest floor while we start cutting down a tree. And it's a little nervous cutting down a tree with a baby on there.
Right.
But everything worked out. We'd gotten better at cutting down trees by then, and Janelle, my wife, was pretty protective, and so we got along fine. But then, You have to wash diapers by hand with a scrub board and a wringer, and then hang them out on the laundry line to dry. This is the old-fashioned way. When you don't have power, no electricity, and the only running water is when you're carrying the bucket fast.
Exactly, boiling diapers. There you go.
That's right. Yeah.
Now as you and your family were out there, and I also know it's an interesting note that your parents did come out, and they were also involved from time to time in the building of your log cabin. So it seems like they were really kind of enjoying the fact that you really had an idea, you followed through with it, you have the support of your wife, she helped out, and you could see a real growing and a transformation in the two of you. Why don't you describe for our listeners what that was like when you're in a process like the two of you were, and how you began to think about things and what your priorities were like?
Well, I think it is important to get out of the city and have some quiet time. It's like centering. I think of what my profession has become. At that time we were just in college, and I taught high school for a year, but decided I'd rather do freelance writing, and now I write books for a living, and it's something that I can do at a log cabin. I have a manual typewriter out there, and I clack out these books, and then I write hiking guidebooks and travel books too. So the idea there is to sort of help other people get out, find a quiet place of their own where they can do some of this centering. In terms of our relationship, I think that building a log cabin is kind of a test of a marriage.
I can believe that.
Right. I mean, you're out there, and you are facing some stresses because one time the tree fell wrong, and I hurt my leg, and we had to get into a hospital, and that's not that easy. If you have to hike out and take a boat, and then go 30 miles into town with the dairy farmer, this is awkward. We wound up. I think it actually wound up cementing our marriage. That turned out to be a very good thing. When you're in the city, the stresses are different, and they can blow you apart. You wind up going in different directions. You each have your career and your commitments, and there's all these other people to distract you.
Right.
But when you're out working on a log cabin, you have this real physical goal, building a house, that you work as a team. And I think, that's an old Oregon tradition going back to the Oregon Trail. Mm-hmm. When the people who came out to Oregon in the 1840s and 50s, they were often just kids. They were teenagers. Nobody was older than 30 on those trips. And they'd come out and have to build their life. And so that pioneer heritage goes way back in this area. It's just, I think a lot of us have lost sight of that. And it's not a bad thing to reconnect with.
No, I agree with you, because you get a lot of opportunity, as you said, to be centered, to become self-aware. As you were saying, being out there with you and your wife, Janelle, that you had your challenges, but you knew your strengths because of that centered quietude, if you will, that you knew how to work through those, rather than being, as you said, in the city where you can just be blown apart and that's the end of it, and you have that easy resource to get away from each other. Out there, when you're, like you said, 30 miles away from town, and it's not easy to get away from there in the first place, it's probably easier just to settle down and kind of work things out. And
yeah.
Plus, when you're screaming, the neighbors usually won't hear you.
I suppose not, yeah.
Now, here's something that's kind of funny, because that a lot of people, when it comes to the pioneering spirit about the way you do things, there's no power to the house, as you said. The only running water was pouring it out of a bucket real quickly, but cooking and keeping the place warm, that must have been a real adjustment for both you as well as your wife. What was that like? Because you actually got yourself a newer wood stove versus the drum one you were talking about, so you can actually cook. And what was that like to actually learn how to use a stove, a wood-burning stove, to cook?
Well, our technology has gradually been getting better. I mean, for the first summer we were out there building the cabin, we were camping in tents with a fire pit. Mm-hmm. So we had like a metal sheet that we put over the campfire, and we'd cook on that. But it kind of limits your cuisine when you're you're
pancakes again?
Cooking. Yeah, barely. Yeah, you got pancakes, and that's about it. A few other. But then when we moved into the cabin, we had, like you say, this drum stove, and it was kind of primitive too. But at least you were inside, and you could get warm because you cut a bunch of firewood and get the place toasty. But then we bought a nice wood range that has an oven in it, and this was like a whole leap forward. But you have to cut the firewood kind of small, and you stoke up the firebox, and you have to know what kind of wood and how hot to get it for cooking. But then you can get the oven hot enough that you can bake bread and cookies and cakes, and then it's really that's like regular cooking. The only thing you don't have is a refrigerator. We have a box in the creek that keeps things kind of cool, but you can't keep milk for more than a few days. So you're just little bit limited. And now I've got to admit that just last summer we put in a solar panel. And this is like another leap forward because it doesn't give us much power, but it's enough to light two 15-watt light bulbs. And these are these compact fluorescents. So they're not very bright, but they're brighter than the kerosene lamps that we've been using for 25 years. So, hey, we do have a little bit of power. It's not much, but it's enough to light a few bulbs for a few hours, and that's a big leap forward. And we're still off the grid, of course.
Yeah. I think what's really nice about the whole story is, especially when it comes to your kids coming into your lives and the real time that you spend together as a family, and you really begin to see that the simplest things are the greatest pleasures in life, and that the distractions are actually unnecessary except for the natural ones. And one of the things that you talk about in your book are the 3 mice babies.
Oh, my. Yeah. Well, yeah, when kids are in town, they want computer games and video and internet access and toys, all kinds of fancy toys. But you get them out in this log cabin, and they focus on climbing trees, catching frogs, reading books, pretty basic stuff. They're happy with whittling a toy by hand out of a. You can keep them busy for days with this stuff, but the most exciting stuff is when they can interact with wildlife. And of course, living in a log cabin, you have a problem with mice. It's almost impossible to chink the log so tight that a mouse can't get in. You can do it so that you don't get like bears or elk or even rats coming in. But mice are amazing. They seem to evaporate through little holes and materialize in the cabin. So we got a cat, figured that would take care of it, but no, mice don't mouse professionally. They at least our cats never have. They will refuse to catch a mouse that's in the cabin. They'll only go outside, catch them, and bring them in, and then let them loose and play with them inside and lose them.
Uh-huh.
You wind up with more mice in the cabin as a result of the cat. And then by the time you find the mouse, it doesn't take long before they've made a nest and have babies. So pretty soon you open a drawer and you find, there's a nest full of babies. And so this happened several times actually, but I sort of narrated into one story in the book of because the mother mouse then quickly vanishes. Maybe the cat ate it. And the kids insist that we raise these babies, even though they are, technically vermin. They're very cute, and it's very easy to get attached to them. And so we wound up raising them, with drop feeding them milk and and finally letting them go in the woods where they belong.
Yeah. They were deer mice, if I remember right, as you were describing. So.
Yeah, we have a couple of kinds. There's field mice and deer mice. And the deer mice are just way cute because they got these great big black eyes, bug eyes, and they are nocturnal, so they mostly, that's why their eyes are so big.
Mm-hmm. What I found interesting, too, as I was reading Cabin Fever, is that here you are, as you were saying, about 30 miles out of town. It takes about a mile from the road to walk in, more or less, to where you're at. You're out there, you're pretty secluded. That would be an ideal situation that you would hear as you do when you hear about people who live in the country. It's so safe out here, I can leave my door open and nobody will bother anything. But in fact, your place was burglarized, and I thought, what would anybody find in your cabin that would actually have any real value for any reason to motivate them to carry it out of that place to go sell it? And what exactly did they end up taking from your cabin?
Yeah, we were just astonished. We thought, we don't need a lock on the door out here. Who could even find this place? But there was a logging company was logging a place nearby, and then some of the guys that were hired to work there, I guess, came down and found the place in the winter when we're gone. And they, I think they must have been meth addicts or something, because who else would have the strength to carry a 300-pound wood stove out a trail a mile? And who would do that? But they took some of our old tools, the tools that we'd use to build the log cabin. Nothing very valuable, but a lot of sentimental value.
Sure.
And then so I got another stove, but it's a larger model, and when I put it together, I smashed all the bolts, so it won't come apart. It won't fit out the door. There's nobody going to take it out of that log cabin unless they take the cabin apart. So, but you're right about you think, this is a place to get away from all possible crime. But one of the weird things was this murder mystery that we wound up having to solve over the years, because, we got the property, my parents got the property cheap, because the previous homesteader who had tried this on this property out there had been murdered, and people claimed that there was a ghost that was haunting the property, and people didn't want to buy it. Our kids made up ghost stories about this old hermit who came out there and built a cabin and then was found shot in his yard, and then that cabin washed away in a flood. So it wasn't even. There's really no trace of this guy other than the stories about him. And so one of the things my wife and I did was we'd travel up and down the valley and visit the few neighbors that there are out there. These are pretty rustic folks. And sort of indirectly ask them, do you know who might have killed this old guy? And if so, are they still around? And what went on? So this became a theme throughout the years, trying to find out what happened to our predecessor out there. Because we figured the odds were good that whoever did it probably is still living in that valley. And probably one of our neighbors, and we just had to figure out which one.
I know when you had the sheriff come to basically investigate a question about the burglary at your place, it was really funny how you were describing him and how he was responding to, and then you actually got into talking with him about the murder. And I thought to myself, are sheriffs really like that if you just get out there in places like this? It's almost as though it's something they do part-time. You just didn't hear a lot of the legal speak going on, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I think you're right. Out in this remote county on the Oregon coast, that the law is a little bit homier. He was actually very interested in coming out to visit the cabin after that burglary, even though he had to hike in a mile, leave his patrol car way back there at the road, but just to find out what we were doing out there. I think he wondered if we were growing marijuana or something. What are these guys doing out there in the woods? And so he came to check us out, and also then was quite willing to swap stories about the murderer that had preceded us, the old homesteader out there, because he did have some clues. In fact, everybody we talked to, thought they knew who did it. It's just they all thought it was somebody else. And everybody blamed someone else. So it took quite a while to collect enough clues that we started figuring things out, and then we found a missing witness and realized what had happened.
So was there actually a resolution to this then?
Well, yeah, I think we realized who was responsible for that murder, but by the time we figured it out, it'd been 30 years since that it happened, and most of the people involved were dead. So we couldn't send anybody to jail, if that's the question.
Yeah,
but it did.
Well, no, it's more of just knowing, really,
yes,
rather than punishment. I mean, especially after 30 years.
In our case, it was laying to rest this ghost. The kids no longer talked about the ghost with the old guy with the eyeball hanging out that haunts the woods. Who's going around with a pitchfork at night, groaning in the woods. No, this is we've solved that murder mystery.
Now, I'm kind of curious, William, as what were your children like? Because you would just be out there for the summer. Generally, what was that entail? About 3 months and then back to school again? Is that pretty much how the routine was?
Yeah. Well, okay. Kids actually love summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
The trick, though, is that they do get lonely. And so we had to keep inviting other little friends to come out and stay with them. And then it worked like magic. As long as we had, a son and a daughter, and they'd play with each other for a while, but it's so much better if you had little friends for them. And then they'd show them how to climb this tree or find the swamp or get lost.
They become real territorial, like, look what we know.
Yeah. Well, they just had, just like summer camp,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a sleep out every night.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Because you could just imagine what it must have been like for them as children growing up to go back into town, to get into the routine of school. Do you think maybe this helped them become good students as well as just, decent kids in an area that, that like discipline, let's say, or self-discipline is really required?
Yeah, they wound up, of course, doing a lot of reading out there, so they became very good readers. But they also they'd get to meet the children of the farmers that live out in that area, and realize that's not really the lifestyle they wanted to go toward. A lot of these people are desperately poor and unemployed and struggling, and so our kids, after seeing that lifestyle, they love the log cabin. They still go back there, but they put their heart into school, and they both now have PhDs. Wow. My daughter is graduated from Berkeley in linguistics, and my son is actually finishing up his PhD at Caltech in astrophysics. You
see, you give your kids a hippie lifestyle, and they become PhDs going to colleges that hippies would go to.
Yeah, right. I mean, here he is. My son actually is a rocket scientist. He really is. And you wouldn't expect
when you have that time to understand yourself and develop your mind, it's amazing what you can do, as opposed to, as you said, being in town with the video games and television and all those other things.
Well, I think it shows that all of those video games and technology and these toys and stuff, that's not essential. That the kids growing up, I think a simpler lifestyle is a healthy thing. They wind up healthier physically and maybe mentally too. To get it's not.
I think even spiritually as well.
Well, they seem to be okay.
Yeah. I keep getting flashes, for instance, of Michael Landon and his family in Little House on the Prairie. Did you ever have moments where you would sit in the cabin, you had the fire going, and you would relive, past times, like those fun moments that you kind of remembered? Because I know one of them you talk about was apparently finding a beaver in the refrigerator, but what were some of the other fun little things that you'd sit back as a family and you would talk about? You remember that time?
Yeah. Well, and actually, Little House on the Prairie was one of my kids' favorite books. We read that all the time out there because it actually seemed like pretty up-to-date news. Oh, is that how you deal with lightning storms or floods or whatever? Yeah. I don't know.
Or Nellie Olson, for that matter.
Yeah. Some of our some of the memorable encounters really did deal with animals, I think, because the dairy farmer, we talked him into running some heifers on our side of the river. He had to swim them across the river to get them over to our place. But we had this old, this part pasture and part forest, and so the cows would come over and graze on our pasture, but they were always getting out of the fence and getting in trouble. And the kids would wind up giving them names, maybe. Oh, we're back.
Yes.
Yeah, and anyway, the cows became part of the family almost too. We got to know the dairy cattle that were over there, and the various wildlife. It wasn't just mice. There were just all kinds of as you say, beavers. Although when I say that we found beaver in the refrigerator, you have to remember that our refrigerator is the creek.
Right.
And so when we go down to the creek in the morning and to get the milk, and we see that the milk and all these other things that we'd put in there to stay cold are scattered all over the creek, we figure, we've had a visitor in our refrigerator. I think more often raccoons, though. So, yeah, lots of good experiences.
Well, it's a wonderful story to see that somebody or folks like yourselves decided to go out, decided to, as you said, get off the grid and center yourselves, but doing it on a regular basis of more than 25 years. And to see the end result, as you were talking about how your children have left, they have been or went into college, PhDs, one's a rocket scientist, but they still love going back to that place where they can, again, as you said, center themselves. And it's kind of funny to watch how people will react to movies that may center around those kind of stories and think, that's such a dream. But we try to produce programs like this to show that people are actually doing this, and it's possible, just getting a better understanding of how it's done, so you don't find yourself in a lot of trouble trying to do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for inviting me in. And I guess if people wanted to read more about it, there's always the book, Cabin Fever. And I've actually written a dozen different books, a couple of novels, and several adventure stories and memoirs. So that's kind of what I do, is take adventure and make it accessible to people, I guess, a little bit.
Very good. Well, William Sullivan, thank you for joining us on the program today. You've certainly carved out a wonderful lifestyle to be proud of, and that's what I think a lot of people really hope for. So, again, thank you for taking the time to join us on the program today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
You bet. Again, the book is Cabin Fever. It's Notes from a Part-Time Pioneer, and our guest joining us, William Sullivan. Check it out. It really can inspire you, at least, maybe not to build a log cabin, but to realize the real fruits and the enjoyment that you can have when you decide that at least a good portion of your life in a year should be spent in isolation, where you can really learn to take it easy and let your mind, your body, and your spirit stretch out a bit. Our next guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a founding member of the farm community. We're seeing in today's fast-paced world of rising gas prices, people realizing, well, I don't really want to spend too much time traveling to and fro because, A, I don't like the time that I'm spending doing it, and the second thing is I don't want to spend the money doing it because that's the reason I'm traveling in the first place, is to afford to be able to travel back and forth, whether it's to get food or clothes or go to your job. Well, more and more people are starting to turn back to the community, the thing that seemed to be big on the horizon back in the 60s and 70s, especially along the hippie counterculture, as it would be called. But these people really understood what they were doing. The place was simply known as The Farm. It's located in Tennessee. And our guest today joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program is Thomas Hupp. And Thomas, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, good afternoon. Nice to talk.
You bet. Now, as I was describing, and even the producer is saying, we're starting to see more and more of that ideal of local community on the uprise. What do you think the big interest is with that?
Well, it really goes back to the original reason that we came here in 1971. We took a look around at what the culture was doing, and we didn't want to just become materialistic. We wanted to, if we felt like there was more to life than that, and I started running into other people who felt the same way, and it didn't take very long, and we developed a cohesive unit, and actually went on a caravan all the way around the United States, talking about, it was in the middle of the Vietnam War, we were talking about peace and justice and pacifism and environmentalism, and it was actually, a pretty important topic even back then. And when we got back to San Francisco after the caravan all the way around the country, we discovered we'd become a family on the road, and we had no place to park the caravan. So we thought, well, Tennessee looked like a good place. You could grow food there. The people were friendly. The land wasn't expensive. So we came back to Tennessee and found the original 1,000 acres we bought at $70 an acre in 1971.
Wow, that's amazing. Amazing if you can get land like that today for that price. Now, what was it like in that place known as The Farm in the early 70s? What kind of people did it attract? Because I remember we were doing a show about 3 years ago, and it was the book was titled Horfano, and it was about building a community, if you will, a hippie community that was trying to live the American dream of freedom in Arizona, I believe it was. And there were the people that would participate, they were wholehearted in it, and then there were those, what you would call them, rogue hippies, the ones that were basically giving the counterculture a bad name, so to speak. Right. What was the community like at The Farm?
Okay, well, there was definitely a wide variety of people in that culture at the time, but we were real specific about the kind of person we wanted, and we actually had a gate. And the gate always swung out. You could always leave, but when you wanted to come in, we ended up picking a guy that had done the gate for Camp Pendleton in the Marines. Mm-hmm. And people came in, and they could come for 2 or 3 days and visit us, but you had to get by the gate man even to get in the community. So we tried to weed out people that were, just looking for a free handout or real angry or, had an axe to grind of some kind. But the people that weren't like that, they could come in, and we were more than happy to, share what we were doing and have a good time with them.
Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about the kind of people that you would allow in, you were looking for contributors to come in. If you want to be here, if you want to be supported, you have to at least contribute to what's going on. So how did you weigh and measure that?
Well, that was done kind of through the system that we had. We believed that that hard work was basically our spiritual yoga. And everybody that came into the community was expected to put in a full day's service in one form or another. We felt like that was the best way to get to know us. We had a lot of different things we were doing, farming and carpentry, soy dairy, child care, a lot of different things that we did. And people weren't allowed to just hang out back in the homes and houses during the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that was one of the big stories that I was seeing emerging out of the other show that we had done, is that you see people who were intent like yourselves and living the American experiment of freedom, doing things the way the Constitution had guaranteed us to do. And it's just like people who go on strike. There's the legitimate group that has a gripe that wants to be heard, and then you have these rogue people that come in and just screw it all up, and you wonder, why does that attract people like this? What is it? They have no responsibility whatsoever in anything, but they just decide they want to kind of get in the middle of it. But it sounds to me like you were very strong and stern about not allowing that kind of nonsense into your community.
We actually had people whose, full-time job was to monitor that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, your farm, the farm in Tennessee, was also very influential in midwifery. Tell us about that. I mean, were people actually coming from all over the place to birth children there?
Yeah, well, we had quite a situation with that. It all started on our caravan around the country, and a number of the women in the caravan and their families, they were pregnant, and we all of a sudden were deciding, well, one of the farm's leaders' wives decided, well, if we're going to become a community and take care of ourselves, it looks like the function of childbirth ought to be taken back over by the women. Mm-hmm. And she just started reading up on it and took on the project and started delivering the babies. And by the time we'd gotten back to San Francisco, we delivered 4 or 5 children. And so, when we got back here to Tennessee, the first thing they did was go into town, find a doctor that was friendly toward us, and ask them for our primary care and support. And by our great good fortune, we had a Dr. Williams in the little town nearby that saw what we were doing, put his support behind it, and completely backed up all of our healthcare work. And one of the things I remember early on was the state of Tennessee health people came out early on after we'd achieved the right to have the childbirthing on the farm. They came out and brought the midwives a set of official birth certificates, and also along with it, to prove the karma of it, some death certificates.
Oh boy, that's interesting.
So, and then to make things really go on, in our first book, we put in an invitation for anyone who didn't was pregnant and didn't feel like they could take care of the baby to come to the farm. We'd deliver the baby for free, and if they didn't want to take care of it, that we'd keep it.
Well, that's great. And did you have that many of those?
Yeah,
situations?
we delivered several thousand children here over the last 30 years, and there's a number of them that are now our second generation young people that ended up, being basically adopted by, people that lived here, and are now, healthy, happy citizens of this state or some other.
Well, the big thing is that they came into the world with a sense of belonging, that somebody wanted them, and that's a real tough way to come into the world when you get that feeling that you don't feel wanted by anybody. Mm-hmm. Now, Thomas, this was a farm that was created in the early 1970s. Richard Nixon is in office. You have Vietnam going on, and it seemed our government at the time was trying everything they could to regulate how people in the United States would live. And I know, as I was describing the other person earlier in the program, it seemed that was a constant barrage, the people questioning what you're doing. What kind of situations did you find yourself or the farm under when it came to how you were perceived by the government and the public? Were there any negative ramifications, or did it seem that they were more encouraging and helpful?
Well, of course, we were pretty colorful.
I can believe it. I mean, you're living off the grid. You're not doing the typical things like going to school, going to college, getting a career, and those things, but you're really carving a lifestyle that was pretty much guaranteed by the Constitution.
Yes, and we were some of the first long hairs that any people around here had ever seen. And it was similar to, a bunch of Martians stepping out, onto the back 40, except that right down the road from us was another religious community called the Amish.
Oh, wow.
Who were off the grid, took care of themselves, dressed a little funny, and so that was like people were already used to, there's different ways of living around here. But one of the very first precepts that we had, and probably one of the main reasons that we're still here today, is that we said in the beginning, early on, the only way that we're going to be allowed to stay here is if we get along with the neighbors. And we went out of our way to always pay every bill, to always leave every interaction with someone from outside our community with more than we brought into the interaction. And it took a little while, but before long, when these folks started to realize we wanted to learn what they knew about farming, about horseshoeing, about growing food, they started to befriend us, and they became our greatest teachers.
It's really amazing what courtesy will do for you.
Yeah.
So you really didn't have it. I mean, you've been, we're talking almost 40 years.
Yeah.
Nothing really negative happened at all just because you were just always doing the right thing.
Yeah, well, we had a few incidences. We had at the time we had marijuana was our spiritual medicine, and we actually had an altercation with the feds the first year we were here when somebody planted some in a back 40 and it had gotten found, and we actually took the case all the way to the Supreme Court and lost it. But that certainly we weren't exactly on everyone's top list, but with the locals, the people who weren't part of the authority, they were always supportive of us.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that as I've read about communities and community living, is that communities tend to seem to have a theme or a mission, a reason, if you will, for why they are the type of community. And I had read certain communities exist for this particular purpose and certain ones for that. What are some of the different types of communities? If people are kind of considering, well, I'm thinking about living off the grid, this community thing sounds like a lot of fun. Obviously, you've got to be somebody who's willing to contribute and be part of the solution rather than becoming a problem. But what are some of the types of communities out there that people can consider as they're exploring the possibility of living in one?
Well, that's a good question, and there's actually a group and a website that kind of draws all those people together under one roof, and it's called the Fellowship for Intentional Communities. And I've been to a few of their gatherings, and you get a very wide range of people. There's thousands of different intentional communities around the country, from like what you would call co-housing units in urban areas, where perhaps a group of people will get together and buy an apartment complex and run it as have a commons area and work together as a team in different ways, and it's worked out real well for them. There's specific religious communities. There's communities that are probably activist oriented for one reason or another. They've pulled themselves together, and with our community, we definitely, I feel like probably one of the main reasons that we've maintained ourselves over this close to 40 years is that we did have in the beginning a spiritual first cause, where we all felt like we were here for something greater than ourselves.
Well, And there it is. It's understanding that even as an individual, you're part of a greater whole. What were some of the most important things that you learned during your time within this farm community?
Well, there was a lot. Learning how to get
along. It sounds like there is. It's like, where do you start?
Yeah. Like learning how to get along with people is one of the biggest ones. Being able to, at the beginning, living in close quarters, getting to know people some for the first time, having young children that you're helping take care of together. What we did, one of our main precepts there was, we had two kind of main precepts that worked real well. One was that we believed actually that there is a thing called telepathy, where I can kind of get a feeling for what you're thinking, and so we had an agreement to be honest, to tell each other, did I just notice that you didn't like what I just did, kind of thing. And of course, in the beginning, we weren't very good at it. We got better at it as we went along. But that was real helpful, just to learn, to do our best to be honest in relationships, and talk about not just the physical things that were going on, but psychically how we felt. Other things that I learned was, I can probably build a house from the ground up. I spent 4 or 5 years on the farming crew, and one year in charge of 40 acres of sweet potatoes. Ended up learning how to put in satellite dishes the first year that they came out, and ended up, when my family and I moved to Florida later, ended up having a great career going through the Caribbean, being a satellite technician in the 80s and 90s. So, there's just a lot of things. Oh, and then another important part of it was we had, we developed a relief organization early on called Plenty International, and we took the skills that we had, these kind of like high-tech third world skills that we were learning, and we went places like Guatemala, South Africa, the Bronx in New York, and we'd set up ambulance services, radio stations, midwifery, soy dairy technology, all these kind of things. So we really got a chance to kind of like spread out and see the world, as well as being back here in the woods.
Well, I think too that in growing and being in a place like this farm community in Tennessee is that you get this feeling of not really being attached, but being at home. And there's a difference because, just as I was describing earlier in the program, the feeling of having to go to work so you can pay for the things that you think you need to hold on to kind of keeps you stayed, versus a situation like that you were in with this community. You're contributing, but there's a real sense of personal freedom at the same time.
Oh, that is the key. Just being able to get up in the morning and believing in what you're doing, and having teamwork and a crew all working toward the same goal. These are the things that are kind of like the bread of life that just allow you to get up and never feel like you're being oppressed or you're bummed out because you're up and around. And I just feel very grateful that I've always had that my whole life.
Now, I'm sure you had a good level of entertainment, especially back there in the 70s, and there was a lot of great things going on. Any special guests, musicians? What went on out there that might have been fun and worth letting people know about?
Oh, gosh. Well, of course we.
Because I can imagine something as big as you guys must have had some really.
Oh yeah,
neat times.
we have great rock concerts on the farm.
I'll bet you did.
That. we had wonderful musicians, and one of the beauties that we had was, as soon as we had all these great apprentices for all of our young people when they started school. And right off, they wanted to grab the guitars and the drums. So a bunch of the young people started to learn music, even in junior high school. And now, there's numbers of them going around the country in professional bands. At this time, they kind of came in and outperformed us over the years. but we had people like Wavy Gravy came to the farm, and we had a lot of nice spiritual teachers come. Sufi Sam, I don't know, some people might still remember him from the old days in San Francisco, and Pir Vilat Khan from the Sufi traditions, and we had a lot of good bands, but most of them were, homegrown.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's just that you have that artful time, because generally when you have everything you need, art usually is the place that the person moves spiritually to develop themselves even further. Now, this is certainly home for you. It's always a place you can go back to, and I don't think there are too many people who can say that with any real conviction, that even though, as you said, you had a career in the 80s and the 90s, being able to travel around different places through installing satellites and technology and the like, that you always had a sense there was a place you could go back to that was home, and that must give you a pretty good feeling.
Oh, it's wonderful, and one of the most interesting things about the whole experiment has been we were able to create a tribal community in one generation. Mm-hmm. Our children, the ones that were born here, they are the ones now who come back to our reunions en masse, and come back like moths to the light, and they can meet each other anywhere around the world, perhaps not even have known each other, but if they find out that they were from this community, they know they can trust that people, they know where that person came from, and they've got literally a community that will stand, be in good stead for them throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm. I know that we did a show one time, and it was about growing up, rites of passage, manhood, and it seemed to me also one of the elements that we're missing, and why we have such a difficult time in the United States and American life is, first of all, there's a lot of broken families, but it's also the fact that we don't have initiations into the stages of different levels of life. But you can't have those unless you have a base or a home that you feel belonged to. And I mean, what do we have this day and age? Maybe our college alumni or the high school reunion, but what if you didn't even like those people? And here you've got an actual community where you, as you said, you could be somewhere else in the world, and if you find out that you were from that community as you talk with someone else, you have an immediate bond because of the understanding that you have from being there and experiencing that.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you go and, if people are interested, say, this community thing sounds really good. I think that I'm probably in a neighborhood, for lack of a better analogy, that I really know my neighbors, we really get along. Is there a way that we can create and develop a community for ourselves? Do you help people do that, and how do you go about that process if you do?
Yeah, well, there's, once again, if you can get into this fellowship for intentional communities, there's books on this kind of thing, how to build community. And we don't have it specifically put together here, but we've had people come here who've written these books, and we talk a lot about it. Your initial agreements are the most important thing. What are your first causes for you all coming together? And if you can get to an agreement on that, and that's at a high level, to me that's the starting point, and the most important point. All the rest is just the details, But if you've got like somewhere in there that you have a strong commitment, and the next guy next to you has a strong commitment that's very similar, then you have that strength and that energy to work out details and disagreements and. I want to put this over here, and you want to put it over here. I want to spend the money here, and you want to do this. You can work through that kind of stuff if you have that first cause that's strong. So I would say that would be, the key.
And I'm sure too that you must have learned, as many people who lived here on the farm, is that you begin to discover what you truly need versus what you want, and that certainly can give you a lot of personal freedom as well.
Oh, gosh, especially nowadays.
There you go, because I'll give you an example. There was one time I was doing a trade show in a mall, and I walked by a kiosk, and it's one of those billions that you see now selling cellular phones.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady says, "Do you have one of these?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't." She says, "Well, you really need one." And I said, "No, I really don't." She says, "Do you have a cell phone?" And I said, "No, I don't." She says, "You really need one?" And I said, "No, I really don't." And I gave her an example of why I understood why I didn't need it is because we were actually broke down miles outside of the city, and there were plenty of people stopping and letting me use their cell phone so we could call a towing company to come and save us. But she kept demanding and thinking that I needed this thing, and I'm like, I got along fine long before the cell phone ever came along, and so you begin to understand what you need versus what you want.
Yeah, boy, that's for sure. And the part you're talking about that's really important is the freedom you get from it. Because if you're all tied up with nothing but expenses, then you're not free. It can be very stressful, and you can't take vacations when you want, and a lot of problems there.
And what's funny when we talk about what we are today about these communities, such as the farm community that you lived on, is that a lot of people seek that freedom through money. They think money will actually get that for them, and you guys did just fine without it or with very little of it. And you realize that's probably something you really don't need. It helps from time to time, but it's not a real need. Is that an experience that you had as well?
Well, I'd put it more along the line of money's green energy. So
sure.
We've gotten along well without it. But we don't. We've all learned not to shun it either, because
sure.
it can help. It can help you help situations in the world. So we're coming up with a new concept that we're getting ready to teach in our classes here in the community called permacultural finance.
Ah. And what is that exactly?
Well, it starts with the concept of everything that you spend your money on, you have to start to look at what are the ramifications. And one of the big important things is financial intimacy, to spend your money locally in your community, not letting it go into a till somewhere and end up at a balance sheet in a corporate desk 3,000 miles away.
Intentional spending, I like that. Well, it certainly has been a pleasure to have you on the program. What are some other projects that you're pretty passionate about that you're involved in now?
Well, our big one is we're working with a national, or rather international, educational project called Gaia University International, GAIA, and they have put together an action learning program where they give degrees in, there's a bachelor's and a master's degree, and basically it's a degree in what you might call permacultural engineering, like what are the skills we need to navigate the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And they learn permaculture, they learn personal growth, they get to then diversify out into like this green business course that we're getting ready to train up in, natural healing, all these kind of things, and they're putting the campuses together all around the world, so you can go from one to another, and all the credits transfer and so forth. So the farm is probably the first campus in the United States for this school.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very encouraging. It's funny to think that people would listen to this show and say, well, this is an alternative lifestyle. This is a new age lifestyle. And I'm thinking, no, this is something that we were before we became what we are now, and we're going back to what we were before again.
Well, people really want to know what we're learning and what we do, and the experts that we bring in. Things are changing so fast and so rapidly. We're coming into new paradigms so quickly here, and we just feel like, one of the answers is to become part of the answer and not the problem. You know, like
exactly.
how can we help people, you know, cut down on their their fuel expenses? How can we help people get their personal growth more together? How can we help people learn how to grow their own food and be healthier? You know, these are the things that are going to be important here in the 21st century.
Absolutely, and it sounds to me like we'll probably go back to those nice times of communities all supporting each other, not relying on...
Oh, it's great fun.
Yeah, it really, really is. And again, Thomas Hupp, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Is there a website people can go to find out more about this or begin their journey of research should they decide after listening to this show?
Yeah, I'll give
That's
you
the direction I'd like to go.
Yeah, a couple different websites.
Okay.
One is called thefarmcommunity.com. That's
okay.
our kind of the farm website. And then there's ecovillage.org. Those would be two that would get you to pretty much everything that we do here.
Well, again, thank you for joining us on the program. There's just a certain romantic feeling just about all of this, knowing that everybody's working together, everybody's growing together, and it gives you a good feeling of belonging, knowing that this is a lifestyle that is very possible. All you have to do is just make the choice to do it. And again, thank you for sharing this with us on our program today.
And thanks for having your program, and thank you very much. It's nice talking to you and all the people out there.
You bet. Thank you again.
All right, take care.
You bet. And our guest, Thomas Hupp. So if you're ever interested in getting back to the source, if that's what you want to call it, there's your opportunity. If you find yourself just tied up with the binds that tie you, that make you frustrated, and having to make that commute that you don't like to make each and every day, or working in a place that you just don't like working anymore because of choices you've made that have tied you down, well, start moving in and solving those so you can find that personal sense of freedom that is available to all of us. I'm Daniel Davis. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program today, and be sure to visit our website. That's beyond50radio.com. That's the number 50 with a 50. And sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. Also visit our blog. We also welcome your questions or comments. Just shoot me an email, daniel@beyond50radio.com. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, live your day past halfway.